But anyway, let us get a sighter for where we are. So we're in Stamford Bridge, and I guess some of you may have heard of Stamford Bridge. For others, it's probably a name that you're hearing for the first time, or reading for the first time. We are a few miles away from York. I was going to start on the other side of the river. I'm going to show you the main road, the Roman road, the A166, but I thought it's so damn pretty here, particularly I thought the light's going to be nice. I thought it's always nice to start by a river shot, just get that kind of movement in, that kind of mesmeric. And it's actually quite swollen at the moment, the River Derwent we're looking at. It's normally a fairly slow moving river. You can see it's got a bit of a lick on, so that's the additional kind of flood waters kind of running through. But there's something to me just about starting by a river that just makes for a wonderful communal activity. So there we are with the kind of sky. So we're in the village of Stamford Bridge. And just give me a shout out. Has anybody actually heard of Stamford Bridge before I kind of get started? Do let me know if you've heard of Stamford Bridge. Because obviously it's one of these, hopefully by the end of this tour you'll kind of know why it's such an important place. Marlena, we're going to look out for accommodation to your ever burgeoning property portfolio. But I'm not hearing anybody saying that they're aware of Stamford Bridge, so I'll take it that none of you know. And I'm going to try and cover off sort of very broadly kind of 2,000 years of history. But actually, in many respects, for a place that's been around for so long, yes, it dawns on it, 1066, it seems kind of rather unfair that Stamford Bridge is only known for one of the events on one day. And when that day fell almost kind of 1,000 years ago, it seems even more unjust. But some days just change the course of history. Oh, Deirdre's been a few years ago. And history changed here on the 25th of September 1066. So it's almost the anniversary. I missed the anniversary by a few days. There was a big reenactment of the battle here yesterday, so they're in kind of full celebratory kind of remembrance mood. So in this village, just 8 miles from York, the age of the Vikings came to, I think we're going to walk on now, came to a kind of sudden, actually I'll let the lady walk on a little bit first. The Viking age came to a clanging end. Okay, a sudden, catastrophic and very bloody end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So, we kind of think about the Vikings were those powerful kind of forces, ever known in human history. Well, all that ended here in September of 1066. But the site doesn't start with the Vikings, because we're walking through now, hello Anne, a Roman settlement. And, it's there's very little traces to be found above ground, so there's no kind of Roman temples, there's no buildings, not like in York with its walls and so forth. So it's perhaps no surprise then there's actually no real knowledge of Roman settlement here until the extremely dry conditions of 1976. Now I bet there's people on here that can remember that summer of 1976. Very, very hot. We had standpipes in the streets, we couldn't get water out of the taps and so forth. And everything dried up, and something incredible happened here. If I just find a picture, no, cancel, I don't want to do that. Just remind myself that here we are. If you just have a look at this, it's a black and white picture. But if you have a look at the centre bit of the field, and to the right, can you see, if you look really closely, the markings? And what happened was, basically the crops had failed, they kind of just shriveled and died. And the soil was so dry that when a plane went over to take some aerial photographs to kind of survey the countryside, for the first time they saw these markings. And can you see them? They're kind of faint, but once you start to look at them, you can see it's all kind of shapes. And basically, it is the Roman settlement. So they hadn't known about this place. In fact, they'd thought that the place is referencing the Derventio was actually Malton. They got it kind of wrong for centuries. So it wasn't, and had we not had this kind of freak bit of weather in 1976, then it might have been undiscovered. But obviously since then, so let me try and get rid of that for us. Since then, this is what I always struggle with, getting these things back off again. I get them on. They come off for you, but then I kind of forget how to get rid of. Until I start again, I go, oh yeah, that's how I do it. And right now it's still eluding me. How do I do it? There it is, right. Okay, so we're going to walk on. And we're going to talk about a little wooden bridge a little bit later on, which is kind of key to the story of the battle. And there's no wooden bridges here now, apart from this one, which is another reason why I thought it'd be pretty funky to start here. We'll talk about the Romans again in a minute. But just as we cross over, I want you to get a mental picture of this little wooden bridge, because later I want you to bring this to mind. So kind of focus in, get a mental picture of a little wooden bridge over the waterway hold that thought, we'll come back to it. So, since the kind of 1990s, there's been a number of kind of localised investigations, including small-scale excavation here. Together with kind of other excavations in the vicinity, so around this area, they did find a villa to the east, I think, of Stamford Bridge. The evidence kind of points to a settlement being characterised as kind of minor town rather than a more common rural roadside settlement. And experts agree the name of the settlement was Deventio. Deventio, that's it, sorry, couldn't pronounce it then. Struggling over my letters. Just back at Preston, hello, Harold, lovely to have you. So the River Derwent that flows through the village gives its name to the settlement, okay? And the name Deventio is a Celtic, and it comes from a word dervo, which means oak tree. If you've ever heard of a dervo before. So Stamford Bridge is kind of sited at a kind of natural fording point. In other words, a place where it was able to cross the river. So fording is not using a bridge, it's basically having a low point in the river where you can get people, horses, equipment, supplies, etc. through the river. And that existed here at Stamford Bridge, so it became an ideal place to build a Roman camp. Also, its proximity to York, so 8 miles and so forth, meant it was a good kind of location to have these sort of strategic points. And it's at a junction of Roman roads linking York to Malton and Brough to Thirsk. And also the ford would have been used to block the navigation on the Derwent, making it a kind of transshipment point. So basically they created the infrastructure to load on and off boats, because actually in the Roman era, we talk about Roman roads, but actually water movement was incredibly important to them, and they really kind of exploited the water network. So where they kind of located their forts was very much orientated around the kind of river network and so forth. So the ford is kind of overlooked by this kind of marsh, thank you, Cheryl, by a camp which we think dates to about AD 70, which actually would make it the year earlier than the founding of York. So that coming up to sort of settle the kind of tribal civil war that we've talked about before, Cartamundia and her husband, ex-husband, they settled here before they came to York. And evidence suggests there was settlement on both sides of the river, so where we are now in these fields either side of the river would have been the Roman kind of settlement. And they were here till at least the kind of 4th century. And the road linking the settlement of Derventio to Eberacum and to the coast is still in use today. So again, let me just try and bring you a map. So again, if you look, see Eberacum should be at the bottom of your screen there on the left-hand side, and Deventio, Stamford Bridge, about an inch or so, well, depending outside the screen you've got. Further along, you've obviously got the coast Bridlington at the end. Sort of almost up above, but sort of slightly to the right, you see Malton. So you can see the kind of road network of these kind of Roman fortresses. So Stamford Bridge very much kind of part of the Roman infrastructure. And this Roman road here, which is now the A166, which passes through the village, we're going to see in just a few minutes. This is the Roman road that links kind of York to Bridlington to the east coast. So again, of course, ships coming over from Northern Europe, kind of the Low Countries and so forth, coming into Scarborough to Bridlington and so forth, to Humber Estuary, and getting goods across. These roads, if you like, were sort of then supply chain routes for the Romans. So, but it's the river that's kind of defined. So again, let me try and get rid of that. Let me try and remember how to do it. Off. And that's it, good, remembered it. So when it came to building a railway bridge to cross the River Derwent, so jumping for centuries now, Stamford Bridge was chosen as a natural location. So by the mid-1840s, George Hudson, we've talked about him in York before, the railway king, his firm had constructed lines from Leeds to Selby, Selby to Hull, Hull to Beverley, to Bridlington, and having made huge profits through his unscrupulous business dealings, George Hudson now set his sights on building the York to Beverley line. And in May 1845, the York and Midland shareholders agreed to proceed with surveys for the line and its branch. So the company's totemic leader, George Hudson, had been notorious at overstating profitability and understating the risks, costs, difficulties and so forth of connecting places by rail. And so often that was either because he had to burrow through solid rock in the kind of paydown areas, or more often around here, because you had to cross the water. And it's not simply a case of crossing a narrow river, that's fairly easy. It's the soft, flood-prone areas either side of it. And of course, trains weigh a lot, as do bridges. So consequently, it becomes an expensive endeavour. And so all the easy routes, if you like, had been kind of picked off, leaving the more costly and challenging routes. So how do you carry rail over a river and the surrounding wetlands And this was sold by an engineer by the name of J.C. Birkinshaw. And this design that you're about to see, I think, is absolutely stunning. It is an amazing bit of Victorian engineering. So the bridge consists of 15 brick arches crossing the River Derwent, but it's not just a case of crossing the water. That bit's fairly easy. It's crossing all the soft land between, if you like, the beginning of the span and the end. So the viaduct consists of 24 feet spans. So in between each arch is 24 feet. So a semicircular brick, and there's 10 on one side and 5 on the other. And then you've got a 90-foot cast iron span across the middle. So the total viaduct is 1,000 feet in length. But don't you think it is absolutely beautiful? We're going to go up and we're going to sight and smell, if you like, of these. But this Victorian engineering really does it for me. And of course, in those days, it would have been steam trains ploughing across there, so it's not a million miles away, of course, from the Hogwarts Express, one up in Scotland, can't remember its name, that Linda was so familiar with. But what a sight these were. Just this straddling, this confidence that you could just conquer the landscape. And there was always an engineering solution. And of course, they found ways of doing it. And they brought on budget, different kind of matter really, but they kind of found solutions. They were very can-do kind of society, which I admire enormously. Of course, there was huge problems, terrible social deprivation, inequality, and all these things. But at the same time, their ability to make things happen and their just sheer brio and confidence about what was possible, I find quite staggering. And so when you look at these, it is, I just shake my head in admiration. Because it seems like we can't build anything now. When we do, it all falls down. You can't get people. And there's a really nice painting of this just a year or two after it opened. So I'll show you a photograph as well, but I thought that was absolutely delightful, that watercolour. So I thought I'd share that with you today. Obviously, the light was probably very different on the day you painted it, so it appeared white rather than red, or perhaps an artistic license. I don't know, but isn't it absolutely, thank you, Julie, isn't it absolutely delightful? Thank you, Marlene. I kind of love that. So I'll just also show you take that one off and put that one on. This is taken from a drone, so obviously you get a real kind of sense now of how that's kind of spanning, but isn't it beautiful? I mean, tell me if you disagree. I mean, I wax lyrical about industrial stuff, but I find it very interesting. Obviously, I love kind of, fantastical buildings of all, whether they're kind of secular, religious, industrial. But I just think that is a work of art, and that it's not simply a functional structure, it's a beautiful structure. And if you can make something both functional and beautiful, isn't that just absolutely, what you should be seeking to do in life? That's my little, that's my take on things. But I think probably most of you can see. So obviously we're very close to the river. So this is obviously the central span now, the kind of cast iron. So it's a real kind of striking example of Victorian engineering. Testament to, I think, the skill, the ingenuity of the engineers that built it. And it's also an important reminder of the role the railways played in the development of the British economy and society. Thank you, Nancy. And of course what they did was they smashed the canals just out the water. Once this arrived, it was quicker, it was cheaper, there was much more profit to be made moving your freight on these, rather than these kind of very, very slow canals being pulled along by ponies. So it was, an absolute game changer, not just in terms of the engineering, but the social impact and how it started to speed us up. Our sense of being a 24-hour society. We go from being York to London in 4 days, and suddenly we're York to London in 16 hours. That just sudden, almost overnight kind of drive of economic activity that kind of results from this, I think it's a real driver of Britain's kind of huge success. So I'll just kind of show you along here. So it opened on October 3rd in 1847. So this is, as I say, when you're looking on this side, obviously you're dealing in, the river's here. The edge of the river is over there. So all this side now, this is about engineering a solution to make it solid, to make it stable, to make it able to kind of carry the trees. So what's the name of this bridge? It's simply Stamford Bridge Viaduct. So it does blend nicely to it does, I think you're right. It's now the oldest remaining bridge of its type in the UK, by the way. which is interesting. It survived, despite our friend Dr. Beeching, and I know you're all inwardly groan, those that know about these things, every time I mention Dr. Beeching, because he seemed to hate the railways. We seem to love them now, but he hated them then. Get everybody in their cars, close everything down. So Dr. Beeching decided that this was not a railway that should be saved, and believe it or not, and this is one of these where you're all going to shake your head, in the early 90s, the council said they would demolish it. So in 1991, it was unstable, needed a lot of work doing, didn't have the money, there was no appetite for it. So they started to just pull it down. But as with all these things, often in these kind of acts of casual vandalism that from time to time councils take it upon themselves to do, don't forget they knocked down the Cavern Club, you know. I know it's not Stamford Bridge, but just that's the ultimate example, isn't it? Who's going to care about where the Beatles played 1,000 times? But what it did was it solidified support. A campaign got going, people got organised, and so they pulled together, and so basically they got commitment to keep it. It was refurbished, now cycle route going across the top. There's no cars, so it's kind of clean and sustainable. Everybody can enjoy it, old ones, little ones, big ones. It's so fantastic that for the people to get organised, but you shake your head at the thought of people deciding they're going to knock it down. But there we go. That is that's just the way it is. So we'll be a little bit quiet here. We've got a fisherman over here, we don't disturb him. So the Derwent runs about 70 miles through North Yorkshire. It starts up on the North Yorkshire moors and kind of comes out sort of down here out into the Humber estuary. And hello there. And having a good day?
Yeah, very good, thanks of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just say hello to the world.
What's it for you, Joe?
Yeah, we're on YouTube now, yeah. Thank you. It's a really good river, actually, for fish traditionally, the Derwent. So before the last ice age, those are like maps and diagrams, the Derwent flew differently to how it does now. It flowed east and discharged into the sea near Scarborough. But during the ice age, these outlets were blocked up with ice, which then carried loads of detritus. And it almost kind of permanently dammed it. And then it seems the Romans kind of liked the way it was. So if I just bring up the image here. So you can see the Derwent there, right in the middle. So you see where Derwent is? Right in the centre of your screen, sort of upper third, but bang on in the centre, molten above it. If you look at how the water starts, for a start, it would normally just flow from inland to the sea. Okay, then you've got a second route, which we kind of straight down, if you like, and see where it kind of connects with Hull and to the estuary there. Again, that would be the way that kind of gravity would work. But instead, it looks like the Romans kind of rerouted it to run through Malton. And then once they'd done this, there was also the forces of the kind of glacier created the Howardian Hills, the Vale of Pickering Lake, and all sorts of fascinating things. So it looks like the Romans deliberately kind of dammed and shaped and encouraged it to kind of flow in a direction that isn't really kind of natural. But that's the interesting thing, isn't it? To me, I find glaciers fascinating because they just change things. We think of everything as being so permanent, being here forever, and it's not. It's just glaciers have just knocked it all about and just created new landscapes. So I always think that they're very interesting. So in the springtime, I'll get rid of that for you. This is a really good, it's sort of famous for being a kind of great nature spotters place, is the River Derwent. So again, I'm just struggling to get the screen back. There we go. I'll give you another view of the water. And Jill lives near the Foss in York. Okay. So you've got wildflowers, roe deer, fox, hare are down here. Otters have been seen, minks. Shouldn't have minks, of course. They were introduced, weren't they? Unfortunately, minks were used for animal testing, I believe, weren't they? And then people like the ethical treatment of animals, the pet of people, whatever, they let them loose. And unfortunately, they then took over, and a lot of our native creatures just can't compete with them. And so minks have taken over from stoats and weasels and these kind of animals that were sort of indigenous to this country. But anyway, they're around here now. A lot of eels in the river. If anybody knows about eels, lamprey eels you can get here. Very traditional meal for the English table. Salmon, bream, bleak, ruffle and bullhead is what I've just told. I read, you can tell, I read those boards that they have by the side of the thing here, telling you what to look out for. There's different types of bats, apparently a pipistrelle bat, and a Dor-Benton bat. If anybody experts on bats, if you come down here at dusk, apparently they are fluttering around like nobody's business. So if you're into bats, then this is the place to be. So, give me another river shot. We're heading back into the sort of centre of the village now, but no, all creeks great and small and Downton Abbey. Very good. So you might be able to just start to hear the kind of cars go. We're coming into the centre in a minute. You should be able to hear, sorry, you should be able to see, I think, the Stamford Bridge. Obviously, Stamford Bridge is famous for a bridge, right? So where's the bridge? It's not the one we've just seen. There's another one, and other bridges are available. I'm about to show you that right now. Now, the location, oh, look at that. That's a nice shot. We'll go over there, trying to fall in the river. And Fran loves bats. Okay. There's a very good place in Leeds, the tropical world. We can go into the lights really low so you can sort of see them all. So you see the lovely bridge there. So the location of this bridge is not the same place as the bridge made famous in the battle in 1066. Now, in the Roman period, the River Derwent could be crossed by the fort of Deventio, and we think that was probably about 300 metres away from where we are now. Somewhere in that kind of distance. It's not really, really close, not a long way, but it's not where the bridge is today. We know that for certain. It's said, they believe that the first bridge here was built during the existence of the kingdom of Northumbria. It was a narrow timber structure. Do you remember me telling you about the narrow timber structure? Just keep that in your head. Which may have been on the site of the ford or about 160 yards further downstream. So it may be halfway in between here, the Roman fort. So that's why we started town there. So we think that the Roman fort ford was the other side, basically, of where we were a few minutes ago. Other side of the viaduct. Just going to get a drink and then we'll... Bats are very intelligent. Okay, that's interesting to know. How does one deduce these things? They are intelligent or otherwise. And do you get dim bats? Maybe they've got some outliers, or I've just got some very clever bats. You never know, do you? Or are they all similarly intelligent? So, the next kind of, the first formal record that we've actually got in terms of meaningful, rather than just a reference to it, is 1280. And that is the bridge that is about 160 metres downstream from here. So pretty much where the viaduct is now. So that is referenced in 1280. I'll just come down here so you can have a little look at the bridge, because it is actually a rather fine and dandy bridge, and I like it, and so I'm going to show it to you. So I hope you're enjoying the tour so far. Oh gosh, we're already 25 minutes in, and I've been digressing all over the shop, but nonetheless we'll try and catch back up. So this bridge separates kind of east and west Stamford Bridge. We'll talk about that in a minute. Closed recently, causes mayhem every time it closes. But what's nice is there's actually a proper walkway here, so we can see the bridge. So that structure of 1280, down by the viaduct, we know that was there in 1581, and that was a bridge that was stone piers supporting a timber bridge. Now this bridge dates from 1727. That's when the new bridge here was constructed. So again, it's a further 160 yards downstream. So we think, let's place these in line now. So try and give you, so you can see both. Hopefully in the background that you can see the viaduct there. So the distance between here and the viaduct, the same again, that's where we think the original Roman crossing ford was. Where they put it here though, because the river is narrower but deeper. It was designed by William Etty, better known as an artist, built of stone with 3 arches. Very lovely. Reminds me of the Tadcaster Bridge by John Carr, those that went on the Tadcaster tour. Hopefully you remember the one I'm talking about. A wider central arch and narrower north and south arches, which are normally dry. So it shows that the water is up. And this is the A166. So basically the old Roman road routing through between York, Beverley, coming down there. This is Bridlington, sorry. This is that kind of same route. So very, very busy. And every time it closes, as I say, it causes huge panic amongst the folk that have to find other ways around the river. So this is not the site of the battle. I'm going to walk up and see that. But let's kind of walk up now. Normally there's a Viking planter down here, and it seems to have gone. Like a Viking longship. There's a really cool planter that is supposed to represent Harald Hardrada's boat. But it's normally round here. I don't know what's happened to that. So that appears to be kind of taken out. So I don't know if he's relocated elsewhere in the village, but we'll keep a look out. So we're kind of coming in now into the western entrance of the village. We're coming through the A166. It's going to run right the way through the village. And I'll give you a sense now of, yeah, I don't know what's up with that longboat. It just does seem to have deserted us. Anyway, here we go. So Stamford Bridge is a bustling village. It's located 8 miles to the east of York. And the bridge represents the border and the crossing, meaning we've left the City of York district and we're now passing into East Riding, so into East Yorkshire. So now come over this side. And like in Tadcaster, the river splits the settlement in two halves. So Stamford Bridge east behind us and west in front of us, but the historic core of the village is in the west. And the 18th century investment into the new bridge is kind of reflected by some really fine Georgian buildings. There's one over here. Let me just see if I can walk us around and see. And so really cute little kind of local shops, bars, eateries. It's a very nice kind of little lifestyle-y kind of place. Got quite fashionable in recent years. Des Resi. So just nice Georgian buildings. But there's a really nice one. Just over here, it's a legal practice. Hagen Dix, I think. That is number 1 on the square. And so really just fine. So everything that we love about Georgian buildings, symmetrical, focus on simplicity, but really kind of very well built. I think you'll agree, is all present and correct in a one. So maybe we could persuade the Marlene to let you have number 1, the square, as your pad. But I think there's some other ones a little bit smaller, a bit cuter, perhaps for your purposes. But it is a little bit crossover. A busy road this. Lovely kind of porticos, 5 windows, smashing symmetry. So you see the road kind of rising up above us. It's a lovely village. And classic symmetry. The Georgian. Lovely fish and chips across the road. Oh, fantastic. Good to know. Might have some when I'm finished. So lovely elevation as well, kind of working up. So what it does suggest is that there's money here in the village. I'll give you a reason for that in just a minute, but I was really just delighted by number 1. So another kind of striking building here is the corn mill, which I'm going to show you now. And I can't quite get my head into the corn mill being, crossover, being accommodation now, because for years it was a kind of a bar and a nightclub. You used to come down here many years ago. You used to get a lot of bikers come down here, young bikers, with our long hair and scruffy denim and leather. But this pub in front of us, the new inn here, used to get a lot of soldiers in that come down here. And so after hours, there'd often be trouble between the kind of the short-haired soldiers who'd had a lot to drink and the biker types. Didn't kind of mix particularly well, but mix indeed is what they did here at the corn mill. But now it's not that anymore, so we'll talk about its history. So it's a Georgian corn mill, so basically for grinding corn, okay? And it was built in the late 18th century, and it's got a 19th century addition. You can see it in just a minute. And like kind of many mills kind of rebuilt during the early 19th century, it was shortly after the main period of field enclosures was completed, which is about 1825. So the enclosures was basically the end of our universal rights to graze on land and to farm our land without kind of paying permission for it. So consequently, once they knew they kind of got a monopoly, they started investing hugely, the lords of the manors, with these huge mills. And of course what that meant is they could have they'd get access to all the business going. I'm trying to get us a nice view through because it's a lovely building. So they're often very, very fine sort of structures, these, kind of built of sandstone. This one's built obviously of brick. But to say it is essentially a building that has been built to build corn, it is, I think, absolutely fabulous. Isn't it beautiful? So these mills are kind of usually freestanding on level ground, and they're in the best kind of natural site for a mill. So the river just sort of being naturally kind of rooted around to give us a permanent kind of water supply. Hello, Rose. And so they never kind of run dry. It's the best site for the mill in the parish, and there's a mill house attached on it as well. Isn't it gorgeous, the setting? It's so pretty. The mill had a square drying kiln at one end, so part of the main mill, and the building used kind of 3 stories. This was 4 stories, even 5 stories. So a really big production capacity in here. So basically it is, for taking in, drying, and then crushing, grinding up the kind of corn meal. So taking obviously what being farmed and harvested and turning it into something that is, obviously a commercial sort of product. The water wheels are placed to the rear of the mill. So this sort of lower settlement here, which obviously now is pretty a fabulous apartment, a number of apartments, that was where the water wheels were. So they're placed to the rear of the mill, away from the site entrance, and they're encased obviously in a brick outer shell. And the idea of this was actually to keep it all dry, which kind of seems odd in a kind of water wheel, but because the water wheels are constructed of water-resistant timbers, much damage could occur on kind of frosty nights. If the wheel wasn't in constant use, they could kind of freeze up, they could warp, they could change shape, and once they change shape, it's like clanging into each other and get damaged. Of course, it's very, very expensive. So it was a kind of half-dry, half-wet wheel, could warp really badly. And so the whole thing was about greasing these up and looking after them, keeping the bearings going so they could last much, much longer. So being in a kind of large mill where the custom is guaranteed, you're going to really, the mill is working pairs of stones, so grinding stones from a vertical tree axle, so it goes right down the centre of the building. I'll show you a cutaway image in it. It's very industrial, this tour, isn't it? So a single large water wheel could turn up to 5 pairs of stones. That's millstones, grinding stones up to 5 pairs. But of course, this has got 2 water wheels. So there's 7 pairs of stones running here. At the height of the kind of mid-Victorian period of prosperity, this corn mill had 2 water wheels grinding, 7 pairs of stones. So I'm just going to show you, for those that are kind of mildly interested, what you'd have seen inside there. Kind of cutaway, you see that at the top of the circular stuff, that's your grinding stones. So all these gearing and cog mechanisms basically mean the water is going through. As the water kind of goes down and begins to sort of turn the wheel, that in turn, by the use of these gearings, is then going to turn and grind the corn. So, once you've got set up, the costs of it are running are very, very limited. So huge profitability. So consequently, they're building these things bigger and bigger and bigger to maximise the profit you get out of it, which is pretty much capitalism, right? Nothing new in that. But again, there's nothing new in the thought of kind of investing in production capacity. But isn't it beautiful? We'll just go on this kind of front side. I'll show you the other side of it, because I really love this building. Hopefully you're enjoying Stamford Bridge. So what happened is the carts. So you imagine you've harvested, you've threshed. So threshing obviously is the harvesting. Usually cutting down the corn, right? And then once you cut down the corn, you've then got to thresh it, which means removing the actual corn heads from the stalks, which then creates straw, of course, it's additional product straw. But then the next job, obviously, is then turning that into something that is saleable by milling it down. So the laden carts would have come down here, and they've been queuing up because you're not going to waste space within your mill. So it's very, very likely, I don't know this, but it's very likely that have been a covered over area on here that would have kept the wagons kind of dry. And not a lot of health and safety would have gone on those days. And the carts will stay outside until they be hoisted in what they call a lucum. And I'll show you a picture of a lucum. There isn't one here, but I guarantee it would have been there at one time. And a lucum, you'll recognise them. We saw one of these in Newark when we were looking at the, where's the picture of lucum? That's a lucum. So that would be on the edge of that building there, and that basically, again, keeping it dry. That would have hoisted up all your sacks of corn that's sort of coming in. They'd be dried then through a kiln and basically processed, working their way out through the other side into the stones, and then by the end of it, of course, you've got sort of commercial grade flour. Sorry. So, in case you've ever wondered, or if you've never wondered how a corn mill will work, that's a brief explanation. So there we go. I think it's absolutely lovely. So it ceased production in 1964. It was in a bar and restaurant for many years. It's now very kind of top-end luxury flats. So there we go. So just turning around, to give you a sense, there's quite a few pubs in the village. Very, very nice they are too. The Bay Horse, being there with Humphrey, he likes it in there. This is the most historic. The Bay Horse dates from the late 18th century. And again, you're looking at really classic sort of 18th century design. So everything is now up on a sort of slight slope. But here is our first reference point to what we're going to be talking about for, I suppose, the second half of this tour, which is the famous Battle of Stamford Bridge. It's a lovely kind of rough monolith here, and on a kind of stone plinth. And here, over here, look, if you see, the Battle of Stamford Bridge. King Harold of England defeated his brother Tostig and King Hardrada of Norway here on the 25th of September in the year of 1066. Show you a few more lovely properties just up there. And down here somewhere, it's got it in Norwegian. So for anybody, I don't know, Natalie, do you do Norse? You're probably the closest to any of us, I guess. But if you can read that, it says the same thing there in Norse, because obviously it is these days. We don't tend to look at it in past times and go, yeah, we won. Simply that a lot of people lost their lives here on this spot. So I am just going to have a sip of water, then I'm going to launch it in, and I'm going to tell you all about the Battle of Stamford Bridge and why we should care, what it represents. So just let this motorbike go by, it's a bit noisy. I'm not going to even try and compete with those. So, when we're talking about Stamford Bridge, we've not only got that famous year, it's all kind of like tattooed on our memories at 1066. We've got the story of two brothers at war. And it's a family war that is so destructive, it saw the end of not one, but two dynasties. 1066 was a kind of cataclysmic year for Saxon England. And the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was kind of terse in its summation. What it said was, in this year came William and conquered England. And in this year Christ Church, which was Canterbury, was burned, and a comet appeared on the 18th of April. Now the comet we now know was Halley's Comet. And this was first identified, believe it or not, in 259 BC in China. We last saw it in the 1980s. I don't know if people can remember the Halley's Comet, but we won't see it again in our lifetime, sadly, most of us. So in case you missed it, or you haven't, don't remember what it looks like, here is a picture of Halley's Comet. Isn't it beautiful? And of course, for many, it was said to augur terrible things. But who was it auguring them for? That's the kind of question. If you've got a symbol that looks like it could be saying there's a terrible defeat on the hands, which way is that going to fall? So people were jolly suspicious, it has to be said. And they didn't like the look of that one little bit. So the year had kind of hardly begun, 1066, when a political crisis threatened the stability of England. On the 5th of January 1066, Edward the Confessor died, and he had no children. And the problem of the succession to the English throne came to the kind of forefront of European affairs. There were four men who sought power in England. Harold Hardrada, lovely buildings, Harold Hardrada, who was the King of Norway, Tostig or Tosti, who was the banished Earl of Northumbria, Duke William of Normandy, and Harold Godwinson, who was the Earl of Wessex. And it was clear to contemporaries that rivalries between these men would only be settled by war. On the day of the Confessor's funeral, Harold Godwinson, the most powerful man in the land, was crowned King of England. And obviously, these days, we're sort of slightly discomfortable with the idea of people being king or queen on the basis of birth. Obviously, it's a system. But it wasn't an issue then. It was about who had the ability to kind of hold the confidence of the powerful. So it wasn't simply a gift that you could give to your child. You might want to, you might aim to, you might try and orchestrate the outcome, but it wasn't a given. So he's crowned in Westminster Abbey. In effect, it seems a coup d'etat and a direct challenge to the ambitions of William of Normandy. And so William puts in a legal challenge. Lovely old Methodist building over here. friend members of the Comet, fantastic. And so William lodges this kind of legal appeal, but he doesn't really believe that is going to be, I think, the end of the matter. He kind of knows he's going to have to involve military action. And so this meant a seaborne invasion. And so while William assembles ships and Memphis Enterprise, Harold prepared to guard the south coast. So King Harold, the newly crowned King Harold, is on the south coast, and he is there with his best forces, and he's looking out to repel a sea-based invasion across the English Channel from France, or what became France, to England. So the English king's strategic position, though, was complicated by the threat from Scandinavia and from his own brother, Tostig. So in the autumn of 1065, Tostig was ousted from his earldom of Northumbria by a local rebellion. So Morcar, who was the brother of Earl Edwin of Mercia, was invited by the rebels to take Tostig's place. And despite their support for Tostig, King Edward and Harold were eventually forced to accept Morcar as the Earl of Northumbria. So in other words, his own brother, now Tostig feels, has betrayed him. He's accepted that he's kind of lost his position, his status and so forth. So Tostig flees England and seeks refuge with the Count of Flanders. But in May of 1066, he returned to promote his cause by force. And he's leading a small fleet of ships. And Tostig attacks the Isle of Wight and then occupies Sandwich in Kent's and Leonie's part of the world, where he raised or kind of impressed additional sailors and vessels. So he tried to grow his force. So King Harold set out to Kent to intercept his brother, but Tostig sailed north with 60 ships to the mouth of the Humber. He then started trying to carry out raids in Lincolnshire. But it's said that actually William was involved in putting forces, the forces of William of Normandy, knowing that Tostig was getting more powerful, it seems hired mercenaries to go and scupper the fleet. So his fleet, Tostig's fleet, was all but destroyed in Lincolnshire by Edwin Earl of Mercia. And he only ended up with 12 ships. So at this stage in the proceedings, Tostig is not a major player. He may feel like he's got a major grievance, but he hasn't got a major army. So to what degree William of Normandy is interfering here, we just don't really kind of know. But Tostig is casting around for support, and he'd already begun successfully to enlist Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, as his ally. So Harald Hardrada is a fascinating guy. He's sometimes called the kind of last great Viking. He stood 7 feet in height, and Harald Hardrada is a seasoned warrior whose campaigns have ranged from Denmark to Constantinople, and he believes he's got an indisputable right to the throne through his blood links to the households of Denmark and Anglo-Saxon England. Now he too assembles a fleet which numbers at least 300 longships carrying about 15,000 Vikings. And he sets sail before William of Normandy can kind of run the flag at the mast because he has the advantage of the weather. So off they go. Norwegian arms are driving this kind of, these powerful boats towards England. And in the back end of the summer of 1066, Harald Hardrada arrives and he sails to the River Tyne up in Newcastle, where he teams up with Tostig and his men and ships. And so together now, in this alliance, these would be nice ones for you, I would think, Marlena. They sail down the coast and ransack Scarborough. They then enter the Humber estuary and row up the Ouse towards York, and they moor their longships at Rickle, a few miles to the south of the city. And they get kind of tooled up and march towards the walls. Thank you, Linda. And this is when the events become kind of really sort of frenzied. The Northern English get wind of the invasion. And the Earls of Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria assemble an army of 5,000 men to march towards Rickle to challenge the Vikings. And the two armies meet at Fulford in York, and they fight a bloody battle. Now, heavily outnumbering the locals, the Vikings are victorious, but they suffer about 900 casualties compared to about 750 lost by the Anglo-Saxons. The Vikings enter York and celebrate their achievement. Now they can consolidate their power across the north by gathering hostages from prominent families for turning their attention to the Saxon king. But they're not worried about him because he's away in the south. He can wait for now. And so that was the Battle of Fulford, and it was fought on the 20th of September of 1066. And the powerful Vikings, thinking they have an unassailable advantage, are just days from bloody destruction. Because down in London, Awaiting tidings of William's fleet approaching from Normandy, Harold hears about the fall of York and he takes an instant decision. He gathers his warrior band about him, raises his army, and embarks on one of the most epic, heroic, and superhuman journeys in military history. So I'm going to walk down now. We're going to go down to the sort of battle site, which is at the other side of this part of the village. And the sort of next bit is not probably as beautiful as this part. It's kind of regular houses. But it's worth it, I think, to go to the site of the battle. So we're just going to walk down for a few minutes. So travelling kind of night and day, we've got, it's that one, isn't it? We've got an army of about 12,000 men. And they take 4 days to cover 185 miles. And that's full battle gear. So imagine you're marching along, right? And you've got all your battle equipment. And you march out in 4 days, so 50 miles in a day. It is seriously kind of heavy going, heavy duty. Right? So Harold arrives in Tadcaster, just south of York, on the night of the 24th of September, to the night before the battle. The Vikings have absolutely no idea he's anywhere in the vicinity. So as far as they're concerned, he's still in London waiting for the Normans to cross the Channel. That's a big mistake on their part, but it's not quite yet the biggest of the mistakes. The following morning, the weather is extremely hot and sunny for late September, and the Vikings march to Stamford Bridge, where they've arranged to gather hostages from the local gentry. So, of course, gathering hostages with income then, once you go to hand them back, you get paid and so forth. So it would pay, this is the booty side of things, because obviously soldiers, weren't actually paid as such. They were, now then, just trying to remember, I think it's down here that we go. If we get horribly lost at this point in time, I'm sure you'll forgive me, but we'll find it eventually. So the idea was to get the hostages, then obviously when they pay the ransoms, that's when everyone gets they were about to have their payday. So it's very, very hot, so they leave a third of their force to guard the longships at Rickle. But because it's really hot, they leave behind the heavy armour. So they're only carrying their weapons and their shields. So meanwhile, Harold's army reaches York with the crowing of the cocks. And he's gathered more men on the route north, and his army kind of now numbers in the region of 15,000. So very kind of powerful. And many of these are on horseback. So the Anglo-Saxons surged down the Roman road to Stamford Bridge, which is now, of course, the A166. And absolute hell is about to break loose. So the Battle of Stamford Bridge, there's so many kind of different versions, different opinions of what actually happened, that I'm just going to try and give you what you might call the bare bones of the story. The Anglo-Saxons ride out of the west and fall on the Vikings, who were taken completely by surprise. There's a kind of nice story being handed to us down the centuries that Harold attempts peace negotiations with his brother Tostig before the battle, that he actually rides out by himself. So he rides up to meet with Tostig and Harold Hardrada and offer him reconciliation if he switches sides. So come on, Tostig, join me, support the battle, and all is forgiven, you can come back. So apparently then Tostig asks what his friend Harold Hardrada can expect for his trouble, and Harold's answer is kind of pure Hollywood bravado, sort of thing John Wayne would have said. He says 6 feet of ground, or as much as he needs. Of course, he's much taller than normal men. So basically he's saying Harold Hardrada is a dead man. Whatever happens today, Harold Hardrada is dead. Don't worry about him. So the battle commences, and the Vikings are beaten back across a narrow wooden bridge that spans the Derwent. So I think this is the right route. Now, according to some accounts, and certainly popular legend, the bridge is held by a single berserker, a Norwegian, with a big axe. Do you remember I told you to think about that little wooden bridge that we saw about half an hour ago? It might not have been that much bigger than that. I mean, for a bridge to be held by one person, it can't have been that big, maybe twice the size of that. But similar, kind of along those lines. So he's got a big axe, and he gives the Vikings breathing space to regroup on the eastern bank. And this is where berserk comes from. You might have heard the term berserk, or used the term going berserk. A berserker was a kind of Norse warrior who, it's going to put it mildly, we're on Battle Flats Way, so we're now heading into the main area of the battle. So there's more road behind us, so we keep going down here. So they're going to go completely off the head in a battle. And the word means bear shirt, because the original berserkers wore shirts made from bear skin, and they chewed the rooms with their shields. I mean, it's quite terrifying if we to kind of face one of these people. I think this is Moor Road, I think it's called, Julie. So we're looking at white something or other. I think it's the next turning on the left. So they kind of wind themselves up, you know, and get a terrifying state. So you've got this kind of giant of a berserker going berserk on the bridge, chopping the arms, legs and heads off anyone who tries to get past him. He's unassailable until an Anglo-Saxon spearman paddles a little boat under the bridge and thrusts a spear up between the planks to skewer the berserker from below. Now, there's some pretty painful ways to go, but I would imagine that being skewered from below is not only painful, but pretty undignified for a way for a man to die. One of the worst, you think. So the Vikings left behind on the Ouse at Rickle to guard the ships, which are about a third of the total forces. They get wind of their countrymen's plight, and they clad themselves in heavy mail shirts, pick up the weapons, and get this. They set off running. Hot day. Several thousand heavily armed men run the best part of 13 miles on one of the hottest days of the year. And they arrive at the battlefield exhausted. In fact, I read somewhere that several died of exhaustion en route. And they try and lay into the Anglo-Saxons. And although the reinforcements very nearly turn the tide of battle, their efforts are in vain. Harold Hardrada is dead. He's been shot through the throat with an arrow. Tostig is also dead. An estimated 6,000 invaders lie slaughtered in the field. The Anglo-Saxon losses are estimated to be around 5,000. So potentially we're talking about somewhere in the region of 11,000 men slaughtered in the field that you're about to enter. So many corpses are piled on the field that the battle flat, as it became known, was still white with bleached bones 50 years later, when Orderius Vitellius, I think his name is, the historical writer, came to see this site and said it was still white with bones. It had bleached the soil. So King Harold accepted a truce with the surviving Norwegians, including Hardrada's son Olaf and Paul Thorfinson, who was the Earl of Orkney. And they basically headed back to Orkney. Olaf went back to Norway the following kind of summer. But they had to give pledges they weren't going to attack England again. The losses the Norwegians had suffered were so severe that only 24 ships from a fleet of 300 were needed to carry the survivors away. They withdrew to Orkney, where they spent the winter, and then they went, as I say, those who were left returned to Norway. But the kingdom was then divided up between the brothers. And this battle has traditionally kind of been presented as symbolising the end of the Viking Age. And although there were major Scandinavian campaigns in Britain and Ireland occurred in the following decades, but the iron grip has broken, and it would never be restored. Now, Harold's victory was short-lived, so we're just coming into the field now that we believe there to be the site of the battle. It is not 100% precise, but it is certainly in this vicinity. There is a second memorial stone that marks the location of the events that happened here on the 25th of September 1066. So Harold's victory is short-lived. He's won this amazing victory over the Vikings. He's put them to the sword. He doesn't know it yet, but he's struck a blow that's caused the downfall of the Viking dynasty. He must at that point have felt the comet was auguring good things for him. But if he did, he was thinking too soon. 3 days after the battle, on the 20th of September, a Norman invasion army led by William the Conqueror landed at Pevensey in Sussex, on the south coast of England. Harold had immediately to turn his troops around and force march them southwards to intercept the Northern Army. On the 14th of October, Harold, leading an army of between 5,000 and 13,000 troops, confronted the Northern Army at the Battle of Hastings. There he was decisively defeated and killed in action. Thank you, Elizabeth. Allowing for William to march on London and take control of all of England as part of the Norman conquest. The exertion, the exhaustion and losses here at Stamford Bridge had taken their toll. Not only did the battle bring down the Viking dynasty, it brought down the curtain on Anglo-Saxon England. And it happened here in this small village near York 957 years ago. So here is a second marker in the village, setting out where they believe We're looking out across the battlefield here. Can't really see because of the high hedges, but this is the killing fields of the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And it's fair to say everything changes for England, because from this point onwards, the Normans are the last conquerors. They're not quite the French yet. France doesn't exist in the way that we understand it today. We've been taken over by the Normans, who impose a language, a legal system, a culture, a diet, a way of dividing up land, of building castles. This is the final defeat. And it all starts here. From this point onwards, everything's ordinary. It's French. So in some ways, I thought it was quite interesting to take you through a couple of streets there, very, very ordinary England. Lots of people live here. We don't all live in old historic properties. Lots of people live in houses just like this. This is the normal. But our normal is French. And it's French because we lost the Battle of Hastings. We lost the Battle of Hastings because so much effort and energy was put into defeating the Vikings here. There simply wasn't enough power, manpower, energy left to do it all over again. Those three battles, Battle of Fulford, 20th September, 1066. Battle of Stamford Bridge, 25th September, 5 days later, 1066. Battle of Hastings, 14th October, 1066. 3 weeks that shaped the destiny of a nation. Two of those battles, of course, being here in York, famously here, the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So I do hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that was a sort of sprightly jog through the history. It didn't get too heavy for you. And you were able to keep up with all the characters. And you've learnt a bit more about what happens. And of course, don't forget, it was started off with a row between two brothers. If perhaps Harold had looked after his brother and restored him to being the Earl of Northumbria, maybe this wouldn't have happened. England's course of history would have been so different. But how often do family arguments spiral out of control? So thank you, everybody, for joining me. And the light is kind of coming down. I've really enjoyed spending my time with you. I'll be speaking to you very, very soon. But I understand that Leonie is on at 7 o'clock doing something or other. So I'm going to let you all run and see her. So from Stamford Bridge, near to York, I'm going to say bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I've really enjoyed your company, as ever. And I look forward to you all very, very soon. Bye-bye now. I'm still on. Go.